Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents On Wars by Michael Mann, narrated by Eric Jason Martin. Preface. In 2013, I finished the fourth and final volume of The Sources of Social Power, as well as two papers that did not fit into that book. While working on these papers, I realized that, although I had always emphasized the role that military power plays in the development of human society, I had never really examined, in any systematic way, its main mechanism, war. And so, for the last 8 years, I have engaged in a wide-ranging exploration of wars through human history, with a bit of prehistory added too. My fascination with war owes nothing to any personal experience of it. Family lore tells me I was born in a hospital basement during the last World War II German bombing raid on Manchester. If so, that was my last experience of war. Conscription in Britain was abolished the year before I would have been liable for it, and by the time I became an American citizen, I was too old to be drafted. I have never possessed or fired a gun. Some sociologists study themselves. They write, for example, on their own class, ethnic, or sexual identity, but anthropologists and other sociologists, including myself, are fascinated by the task of trying to understand alien ways of life. For me, one such alien way has been war. I have to thank the COVID-19 pandemic for enabling me to work single-mindedly, if remotely, during the last 2 years of this research project, with the help not only of the magnificent UCLA Young Research Library, but also of the Internet resources provided by JSTOR for journal articles, Z Library for online access to most of the many books I sought, and Wikipedia, useful for swift checking of dates and facts. But I must admit at the start that my reading has been restricted to works in English or French. I would like to thank my literary agent, Elise Capron of the Sandra Dykstra Agency, for her support and marketing skills. I am intellectually indebted as always to John A. Hall, as well as to Randall Collins and Sinisha Maleshevich for their seminal works on violence, even if I have sometimes disagreed with them. I thank my UCLA colleagues and graduate students of the Sociology 237 seminars. I pay homage to the classical writers on war, from Sun Tzu through Polybius and Ibn Khaldun to von Clausewitz, Adam Dupic, and Raymond Aron. I must thank a horde of archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians for their very many empirical studies, which I have gratefully looted. I thank political scientists for clarifying the theoretical issues at stake. And I thank 2 anonymous reviewers of my manuscript for pertinent criticisms that I have tried to address. Nikki Hart has been my constant companion for over 40 years. Without her love, support, intellectual stimulation, and reminders of the sunny side of life, I would not have been able to complete this rather dark project. On similar grounds, I would like to thank my children, Louise, Gareth, and Laura. May they, and the whole of humanity, be as fortunate as I have been in never having to fight or to suffer as civilians in wars. Chapter 1. Military Power and War. Wars reveal human beings behaving at their worst, killing and maiming each other in very large numbers. It is easy to deplore this. Herodotus quoted King Croesus of Lydia as saying in the 6th century BCE, "No one is stupid enough to prefer war to peace. In peace, sons bury their fathers, and in war, fathers bury their sons." In the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin said, "There never was a good war or a bad peace." Rebecca West, in 1941, put it more pungently when describing armed conflicts in Yugoslav history. "It is sometimes very hard to tell the difference between history and the smell of a skunk." But what determines whether war or peace is chosen? Are wars driven by human nature, the nature of human society, or other forces? Are wars rational? Do they do any good at all? My answer, in the broadest terms, is that there is an element of rationality in wars, but that this element gets entangled to varying degrees within the emotions and ideologies of human beings, especially their rulers, and within the social structures and cultures of human societies. The combination often drives rulers in the direction of wars that are rarely rational, and that bring benefit to only a small proportion of human beings. If humans and their rulers were predominantly rational beings, there would be far fewer wars, an ideal worth at least aiming for. I analyze many wars, hence the plural of my title. Most studies of war have been conducted by historians and political scientists who are international relations, IR, specialists. The latter have focused on wars involving the major powers of Europe since 1816, which period provides quantitative data sets of wars. Their preferred method is statistical, but it is also Euro- and modernity-based. In contrast, historians study wars in many periods and regions. They also remind us that wars do not come as separate, independent cases to be aggregated into statistical models. They come in sequences, in which experience of the past deeply influences the living. Few historians, however, dare to engage in comparative analysis across different regions or periods of history. I dare do this by drawing on their detailed analyses. As a comparative and historical sociologist, I cover sequences of war and peace over several regions and periods of history, chosen because they offer well-documented cases containing varied war frequencies, namely Rome, Imperial China, the Mongols, Japan, medieval and modern Europe, pre-Columbian and Latin America, the World Wars, and recent American and Middle Eastern wars. Well-documented means ample written records exist, but many societies have not left such records. I regret that I have neglected historical South and Southeast Asian wars as well as classical Greece for reasons of length, language, and personal exhaustion. I do not claim that mine is a representative sample of wars. That is not possible to provide, since the total number of wars remains unknown, and many known ones are only minimally recorded, as in the colonial wars touched on in chapters 8 and 10. I deal with sequences of wars, for wars rarely come singly, and the past constrains the present. This is the tyranny of history. I present simple statistics where they are available. I focus on interstate wars, but since these are often linked to civil wars and extra-state wars, wars involving non-state contenders, I discuss them too, where relevant and where records exist. Military power is also used for domestic repression, which has been a precondition for rulers' ability to make any wars at all, but I will not discuss such repression in much detail. In the course of history, war has obviously changed enormously in weapons, techniques, and organization. The lethality of weapons has grown exponentially over the last few centuries, and the devastation of air power was added in the 20th century, and cyber war in the 21st. This required major changes in military organization and tactics. The organization of state armies has become much more complex, and the nature of battle has fundamentally changed. Body-on-body, ferocious killing has partially given way to callous killing from a distance. Soldiers no longer stand upright in battle. They would be decimated if they did. Modern soldiers disperse in small units over larger battlefields, seeking cover, living underground, quite successfully, since their casualty rate has not increased, despite far more lethal weapons. Military medicine has produced a major decline in those dying from their wounds, accompanied by greater consciousness of psychiatric ailments. Yet weapons, especially air power, have increased the civilian casualty rate, and it is now routine to define the total population of a country as the enemy. In the modern period, political and religious ideologies justifying war have penetrated more deeply into social structure. Finally, our evidence has greatly increased in a modern surge in literacy, adding ordinary soldiers' writings and social surveys to chroniclers' narratives in earlier periods. In contrast, the causes of wars and the nature of war and peace decisions have changed much less. The biggest variations have been among different types of war. I distinguish wars of aggression, defense, and mutual provocation or escalation. I also distinguish four main types of aggressive war. 1. In-and-out raiding. 2. Using military power to change or strengthen regimes abroad to make them compliant, a form of indirect imperialism. 3. Conquest and direct rule over slivers of border territory. And 4. Conquest and direct rule of territorial empires. Obviously, a war of aggression leads also to defense by those attacked, whereas many wars mix up elements of more than one type. Also important has been the difference between symmetric and asymmetric warfare, that is, whether combatant forces were near equals in power or grossly unequal. Each of these types of war has had certain common features through the ages, so that generalizations are possible. But there is a historical contrast between raiding and imperial conquest on the one hand, and regime change in slivers of territory on the other. The former pair have almost disappeared from the earth in recent decades, whereas the latter pair endure. As a sociologist, I hold to two methodological principles. On the one hand, the need for analytical and conceptual rigor, which is necessarily generalizing. On the other, the need to grasp empirical reality, which is inescapably varied. There is always tension, I hope creative tension, between the two. I start with the universal concepts and one near-universal assumption framing my research. I assume that we humans seek to increase our valued resources, material possessions, pleasures, knowledge, social status, and whatever else we might value, or at least that enough of us do this to give human society its dynamism, its history. And in order to maintain or increase our resources, we need to exercise power, defined as the ability to get others to do things that otherwise they would not do. There are two different faces of power. First, power enables some humans to achieve their goals by dominating others. This is power over others, called distributive power or domination, and it generates empires, social stratification, social classes, and gender and racial domination. These are all drivers of war. Second, however, power also enables humans to cooperate with each other to achieve things that they could not achieve separately. This is power through others, or collective power. Human development would not be possible without collective power, people cooperating to achieve their goals, while almost all known societies have contained distributive power relations, that is, social stratification. Collective and distributive power are closely entwined, especially in the minds of rulers, who normally claim that their power over others is wielded to the benefit of all, just as imperialists claim that they bring the benefits of civilization to the conquered, as have Chinese, Roman, European, Soviet, and now American rulers. In the volumes of my Sources of Social Power, I distinguished 4 sources of power: ideological, economic, military, and political. I have also come to make 3 adjustments to this scheme. First, I distinguish political power exercised within rulers' domestic domains and diplomatic, peaceful geopolitical power exercised abroad. Second, I pair ideologies with emotions, since both surpass empirical knowledge. Ideologies and emotions fill in the gaps between pieces of scientifically and empirically ascertainable knowledge. We do not have objective knowledge of the world, and so we act with the help of generalized meaning systems, such as liberalism, conservatism, nationalism, religion, or family values, and emotional commitments. The two are entwined, since powerful ideologies lead to strong emotions. Third, I have seen these 4 power sources as means to achieve whatever goals people have. I still believe this, but now I explicitly add that power can be seen as an end in itself, which I will explain more in a moment. Control over these power resources offers the principal ways in which others can be induced to do things that they would not otherwise do. Wielding ideological, economic, military, and political and geopolitical power is the principal means to achieve desired goals. So, to explain war, we must understand why humans choose war rather than use economic exchange, shared cooperative ideologies, or peaceful politics or geopolitics to secure valued ends. In fact, more disputes are settled or simmer by these means without leading to war. Geopolitics contains two distinct elements: the effect of the geographic, ecological environment on human action, as stressed by late 19th century writers, and the international relations between states and communities, as stressed by today's political scientists. Perhaps the choice of war is not quite the right word. Rulers may feel constrained by the warrior role they believe is required of them. War is simply what Roman senators or Mongol khans or French kings or American presidents do, habitually, when they feel slighted or sense opportunity. Indeed, they do often feel they have no choice in particular situations but to go to war. The vast majority of people throughout history seem to have preferred peace to war, so far as we can judge. They have felt that they could achieve their desired goals better through economic exchange, shared ideologies, or diplomacy than through the exercise of military power. So I am seeking to explain the exceptions, to explain war. The irrationality of war. Are wars rational? The basic issue is whether wars do achieve desired and desirable goals. If so, we might call a war rational. If not, it might be irrational. But we must distinguish between rationality of means and ends. Rationality of means concerns efficient decision-making, which is measured and calculative, balancing goals against means, probably after some debate, according to the best information knowable at the time, and where the means of war seem to be adequate for reaching desired ends. Irrationality of means occurs when the decision for war is made for hasty, uninformed, emotional, or ideological reasons, and when the means are predictably inadequate to achieving the ends. Often the ends sought through war are not reached, but this can happen for many reasons, not all of which were predictable at the time of the decision to go to war. War proved a mistake, but this was not evident beforehand. Mistaken, but not irrational. So I add the legal principle of the reasonable person or bystander. Would such a person have judged that war would achieve its ends? Obviously, rulers who commit to wars always think this is rational behavior. Adolf Hitler thought so when invading Russia, declaring war on the United States, and slaughtering Jews. But few others thought so, including many of his generals. The judgment of rationality rests with contemporaries or later scholars, including myself. There is room for disagreement, but a charge of irrationality may be made where these observers conclude from the available evidence that the desired ends could not have been reached, whatever the later contingencies of the war. For example, this was my own view just before the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, as expressed in my book, Incoherent Empire. Making the generous assumption that the main goal of the Bush administration was the replacement of Saddam Hussein's autocracy with a democratic state, U.S. forces never had significant Iraqi allies who shared this desire, and they had not prepared at all for confronting sectarian divides among Iraqis. As I predicted, the Americans had to strike a deal with some sectarian groups to rule over others, and a disorderly ethnocracy, not an orderly democracy, resulted. This was an irrational war, fought for a delusory goal. So largely was the Ukrainian invasion launched by President Putin in 2022. But in most wars the folly is not as glaring as this. Whether there is irrationality of means may be arguable. Judging the rationality of ends is problematic, since ultimately it involves a judgment about whether war produces benefit, and for whom. Benefit is contestable. Hitler devised an extraordinarily efficient program to kill Jews, 6 million of them killed in only 4 years, a rationality of means perhaps unequaled in all of history. Hitler and his acolytes believed that this genocide was also rational as an end, since they feared that the mere existence of Jews threatened civilization itself. But virtually no one else has believed this, or would consider the end to be rational in the sense of bringing any general benefit. To us, Hitler seems maniacal in his pursuit of this goal, but this is an extreme case, and whether and to whom a goal brings benefit is often arguable. We are on somewhat safer ground with the narrower materialist view of rationality as identified by realist and Marxist theorists. They see wars as mainly aimed at economic gain or geopolitical survival, or both, from which the likely profit or secure survival derived from war may or may not exceed its cost. There are 4 elements involved in this calculation, weighing A, the cost in money, and B, in lives, against C, the likelihood of victory, and D, the rewards likely to ensue from victory. In my case studies, I try to assess the extent to which each of these elements is taken into account. This kind of economic-military trade-off constitutes instrumental rationality, as Max Weber defined it. Where the costs are predictably greater than the profit, war would be materially irrational. Yet even this measurement is difficult, since economic profit, casualty rates, and the chances of victory do not share the same metric, and there is no way of calculating how many deaths suffered are worth and how much profit made for what chances of victory. If human life is considered sacred, perhaps no death is worth any amount of profit. The pacifist position. Yet there is an intermediary position, for proportionality might be applied. As we shall hear, soldiers in battle often try to apply this. They will accept risking their lives, provided they are not being used as cannon fodder, and if there is a good chance that victory is achievable. If they perceive this is unlikely, they will try to subvert orders, or mutiny, or desert. Under proportionality, we might decide, for example, that the 21 worst wars and atrocities in history in terms of deaths, each of which resulted in the deaths of over 3 million people, could not be considered rational, even if they brought profit for the aggressors. But how many deaths would be worth it? There is no satisfactory answer to this. Great conquerors may pay scant attention to the lives of an enemy population, or indeed to their own troops' lives. From their point of view, the choice of war is rational, since it benefits them and their circle. But we may feel that the benefit is not widespread enough to be justified. At a minimum, we must carefully assess what benefit accrues to what proportion of the people, and to judge how rational a war is accordingly. Though we shall find that wars have varied considerably in these terms, in general we shall see that most of them are irrational in terms of such means and ends. Yet wars may also be aimed at desired but non-material goals, such as glory, honor, assuaging anger, exacting revenge, or pursuing an ideology. Power may also be a valued end in itself. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "What is good? Whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself, in man. What is evil? Whatever springs from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome. Not contentment, but more power. Not peace at any price, but war." Those who command may get intrinsic enjoyment from dominating others, regardless of what other benefits they might experience. They enjoy the emotions they elicit from subordinates and conquered peoples, ranging from adoration and admiration, through respect and envy, to hatred, fear, and sheer terror. Genghis Khan is reputed to have said, Man's greatest good fortune is to chase and defeat his enemy, seize his total possessions, leave his married women weeping and wailing, ride his gelding, use the bodies of his women as a nightshirt and support, gazing upon and kissing their rosy breasts, sucking their lips, which are as sweet as the berries of their breasts. Political correctness prevents modern leaders from saying such things, yet power remains an intoxication that might need no other justification. As the philosopher and political scientist Raymond Aron said, the satisfactions of amour-propre, victory or prestige, are no less real than the so-called material satisfactions, such as the gain of a province or a population. These satisfactions are somewhat ineffable, not easily quantified. They may also bring not benefit but disaster to the people as a whole. The pursuit of status, prestige, and honor by statesmen for themselves and their state is an important source of war, independent of what other rewards they might get from it. Moreover, a sense of excitement and enjoyment in power may even trickle down quite broadly among the people, as it probably did among the Romans and Mongols, and does among many Americans today, proud of their country's military power, which seems to boost their own egos. When domination and glory are desired ends in themselves, this may fit Max Weber's second form of rationality, value rationality, which he defined as belief in the value for its own sake of some ethical, aesthetic, religious, or other form of behavior, independently of its prospects of success. The more the value to which action is oriented is elevated to the status of an absolute value, the more irrational, in this instrumental sense, the corresponding action is. For the more unconditionally the actor devotes himself to this value for its own sake, the less he is influenced by considerations of the consequences of his action. His term, value rationality, may seem paradoxical, but it certainly fits Hitler's perversion of rationality. Many powerful groups may be driven by values overriding everything else, values for hatreds, glory, honor, or ideological transformation. Rulers pursuing such ends might calculate precisely the means available for achieving them. But are the ends rational? The benefits they bring are usually distributed very unequally. Small elites benefit most. They may indicate endless ambition, without a resting place, the malady of infinite aspiration, in the sociologist Emile Durkheim's words. The main problem of an infinite aspiration to conquer is the number of lives it destroys. War is a peculiar activity. It is designed to kill a very large number of people, and this surely requires a very high level of justification. Self-defense is generally considered such a justification, but we will find that this is quite an elastic concept. So I will tread carefully when dealing with the rationality of war, trying to distinguish means from ends, errors from irrationality, costs from benefits, the odds of victory, and social constraints. I try to assess who benefited and who lost from the wars I discuss. For whom exactly was war rational in the sense of beneficial? The answer is often almost no one. Defining military power. Human societies involve conflict and cooperation among persons wielding varying blends of ideological, economic, military, and political or geopolitical power. These provide the key dynamic of human history toward the development of more and more complex and powerful societies. Conflicts may be relatively peaceful, using mixtures of ideological, economic, or political diplomatic power, or they may be warlike, resorting to military power. Military power may also achieve desired ends when merely threatened, without war following. The Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu wrote in the 6th century BCE, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." War is only one way of achieving ends, and we must ask in what circumstances human groups turn to military power to achieve their goals. So the first of 3 additional themes in this book concerns the causes of war: when, where, by whom, and why war rather than peace is chosen or stumbled into.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?